Too Much Film School presents Public Domain Theater. Tonight's episode, Nosferatu, a Symphony of Horror. Here's your hosts, Casey and Matt.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Too Much Film School. I'm Casey.
And I'm Matt. Today for Public Domain Theater, we are going to be watching the classic, possibly German expressionist film, Nosferatu from 1922.
That's right. It was remade in 2024, last year, by David Eggers. And again, also remade in 1979 by Werner Herzog, but it's kind of permeated culture. It's been a big, successful one that's popped up. And again, its origins were actually pretty rocky and it faced some challenges. It's actually surprising and impressive at how big it's gotten in the past 100 years.
Yeah, if you've never watched a silent film before, there will be shots in this episode that you'll be like, oh, that's where that's from. Everything is from this movie.
Yes, F.W. Murnau made 1921, premiered in 22. He went on to win an Academy Award, one of the first Academy Awards for Sunrise once he had come to Hollywood.
If you've been a follower of Too Much Film School for a while, you will know that one of my most popular videos is for Sunrise, which was by the same director. It won Best Picture at the first Academy Awards. It won one of the two Best Pictures at the first Academy Awards. Everybody tells you it's Wings. Sunrise is the better movie. And it is the award that it won was Artistic Achievement, and Wings won Best Production. So you decide what you think the Academy thought was the better film. They thought it was Sunrise. It was the better film.
That's why
But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about Nosferatu.
Right.
So let's begin. A Symphony for this is worth noting. The title of this movie is Nosferatu, a Symphony of Horrors. The most recent remake dropped the subtitle. It is simply Nosferatu. So that should be easy to remember.
Yes, and again, it's after the novel adapted from Bram Stoker's Dracula. There's a long time, even when we were in film school, it was the common rumor or the myth was that this changed the name from Dracula to Nosferatu to try and avoid paying for the rights to it from Bram Stoker's estate. But actually, it's not. They credit it. These are the original intertitles. They call out that it's adapted from it. So they weren't trying to get around it. They just didn't think to check that anyone would want to be paid for using the work. So they thought
part of that rumor, as we're looking at the cast page, the names are changed, but that is simply what's called localization now. They wanted them to sound like German characters because it was a German movie for Germans. So they didn't want Harker, they said Hutter, etc. That kind of thing. It didn't, but it wasn't. They didn't think they were being clever and hiding from the copyright gnomes out there.
The trawling bots were slower back then, but they were in fact there. And it was actually, again, Bram Stoker's widow that brought the lawsuit. Bram Stoker had passed away. And this was 20 years on from the novel Dracula. But it was actually a pretty interesting court case. And then, they appealed multiple times over, but the Stoker estate did win out. And all prints of this were supposed to be destroyed. So it's actually, again, interesting that they not only survived, but then it became such a large part of the cultural zeitgeist.
Yeah, the sort of, from a modern perspective, the kind of ironic thing about the reason it survived is it was the American distributors who kept it around, because nowadays the United States has the most strict, broadest copyright laws. They last for longer in the United States than anywhere else in the world, 95 years. But back then, apparently it was the literal Wild West, because that's where the Wild West is from. And the distributors here just said screw it, and they just kept Nosferatu, and they kept circling the reels. And sometimes they did change the name. There was a few alternate titles, Dracula being one of them, which was the most obvious one. There was a couple others that they tried to get away with calling it. But they just kept the movie, and because it was popular, and they shouldn't have, legally speaking, but we can now appreciate that it exists because of intellectual property pirates in the 1920s.
Exactly. They were keeping it real and being underground, and again trying to profit. But yeah, I'll say that the fact that it was made titled Dracula, again, they weren't trying to hide it originally, but they did make it in Germany as Nosferatu, Symphony of Horrors, and then it didn't do well commercially. So actually, the production company that made it was in dire straits and going out of business or in receivership, even by the time they were being sued by Bram Stoker's widow. And so they appealed, and each time they're like, wait, what if we rename it to Dracula and distribute it in English-speaking countries? They're like, no, that's worse. Your appeal's denied. And they're like, we already did that. We renamed it and sold prints to America. So actually, I was hearing there's a historian, David Collater, I think, that was talking about that Bram Stoker's widow was pursuing the lawsuit, but she was also part of the Film Society. And in London, they were like, we're screening a movie. Here, it's this. And it came up, it was Nosferatu, but with the title Dracula in English, when the prints were supposed to be destroyed. So she ended up seeing it there, salt in the wounds. But like you said, it made its way to the US and spread. And she was actually in talks with Universal to make the film Dracula that became part of what launched it, the Universal Horror Monsters. And so actually, when it made its way to the US, Universal bought the rights to all the prints that were there anyway, in order to take them off the market. And I think, again, I had heard it was for $400. So they were just eliminating the competition so there wouldn't be confusion with the one they were working on making by securing the rights the right way.
And there's no artistic integrity involved in this. All of these arguments, by the way, the Universal Todd Browning Dracula barely resembles the novel. This Nosferatu is actually way closer to, if you ever read the book, which is quite good. Like it's an old book, but it holds up. It is very similar to. They compressed some things and cut some characters and stuff, but the general plot is far closer here than in the Universal film. Because the Universal film was adapted from a play, which was adapted in the book, so it was several generations away from like the actual narrative. And but Bram Stoker's widow didn't care. She just wanted the money.
Well, again, she had to maintain her lifestyle after even Bram Stoker, when he was alive, Dracula was the only real commercial success he saw of his books and novels. So I would imagine income and everyone, once they had read it, 15, 20 years later, aren't buying an additional copy of Dracula. So it had come and gone, and she was seeking more revenue streams to keep that going. I will say, F.W. Murnau, again, had much success, came to Hollywood. He was successful even when this was made. But this is an interesting film. People often say, again, German Expressionism, things like Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, they lump this in with the same. But we've seen actually from the start of this, it started in the town with an exterior shot there. It's on location, and it's showing a lot of these pastoral sweeping vistas and buildings, whereas German Expressionism generally was in studios with sets built to exaggerated angles. The buildings would be, again, flats with forced perspective. The trees would be cutouts with, just pure black and long shadows to control them. So this starts actually more, people say, as a referencing German Romanticism, which was the art movement that did a lot more pastoral landscapes and things that F.W. Murnau studied art history and lived in an artist commune and different things like that. So he would have been exposed to a lot of those. And people cite a lot of actual paintings that he is referencing with some of the exterior shots. But once we get into characters, like here, Knock, who's a estate agent, he's the Renfield for this version, he's got the touches of expressionism start to show up. He's clearly exaggerated in his makeup, his hair, his mannerisms are very much German expressions. And even he's got a coded message, and it looks like children scrawling, but again, it's presumably a secret message from Orlok asking for him to send a tasty donor out to his castle.
Yeah, like there are little elements of because he was Murnau was existing in this world where German Expressionism was very popular. So like Knock's chair being weirdly high, like that's a little bit of what you would see in Expressionism. But the office, other than that one weird thing, is generally, it looks like an office. And that's not what you would ever do in Expressionism. And also the lighting, like you can see everybody very clearly. There's not really any deep shadows. There's nothing particularly like moody about it, which is that again, expressionism would have the chiaroscuro shadows and like lines across people's faces and all of that stuff. So it starts out very naturalistic or even romantic, like you were saying,
Yes.
with little hints of getting worse. And I think that might be one way in which, because the shots that we do remember 100 years later are the, which we'll see much later in the film, is the shadow of Orlok coming up the stairs, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
And
rising in the ship's hold, rising out of the
right, where
coffin.
it's all creepy and stuff. That's the sort of thing in this movie has been remade twice. I actually don't know the status of um the 70s one. I don't know what the copyright issue was there, but the modern one clearly is just public domain. They just remade it. They lean much more into the expressionism from the beginning. It's kind of like they take the tail end of this movie and spread it throughout the whole thing, and they don't have the movement from natural, lovely romantic couple into the creepy evil castle thing. Instead, it's just sort of it's creepy and
Creepy
evil the whole
from
way
the beginning.
through, which is like it's a vibe and it's and interesting. But in some ways, this silent film with the overacting, stagey performances is more subtle in the in the lighting and set design than the remakes were because of that. Um, they just sort of hooked onto the famous parts rather than the actual film as it exists.
I will say that this part that we're talking, using the word romantic does not mean lovey-dovey. And actually, the relationship between Hutter and his fiancee is pretty understated. And again, there's been discussions, of it's kind of Hutter is very juvenile. He's like gee whiz, and she's very gothic. And again, so she's got touches of expressionistic acting, or deep pools of black around her eyes. And when he brings her flowers in the scene before this, she says, "Why did you kill them?" And the focus is not on how pretty, but so she's got a touch of the macabre even before Orlok vamps her. But Hutter is very much childlike in nature and running off. But their relationship is a bit odd. I will say that again. Sigmund Freud was around this time and saying, "Oh," and then he goes away, and this other man sucks on his body, and while he's away from his wife, and his deviant nature consumes him. Plus, F.W. Murnau was a homosexual, so there are undertones in this that I don't even know that they are at the surface level, but I think would come through, and it's one of the reasons that people in things like film schools talk about it to this day. So it's interesting to see again the romantic film movement, the romance in this, and then paralleled with the relationship with Orlok. And I will say Dracula from the Todd Browning one, and then later on, the 1992 Oliver Stone one, like they definitely made it more him sexier. He became, his powers to control women and these things definitely took on more sexual tones in later versions, where in this one, Orlok is rat-faced, he's hideous, he's a monster, and him passing for a count or anything in polite society, you're like, oh, okay, they had different standards back then, but I guess he's got money.
I'm gonna pop in before we get angry comments. It's Francis Ford Coppola, not Oliver Stone.
Oh,
who
did I? How they
although they're of the same generation and some of their films are similar-ish, so I understand why you flipped those, but it is Francis Ford Coppola. I actually, in terms of the history and influence of Nosferatu, Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula drew a lot from this because he tried deliberately to use techniques that were used in the silent era to make his movie in 1992. And so in certain ways, the Bram Stoker's Dracula, that was the full title of the 92 film, draws from Nosferatu in a way that the 32 Dracula doesn't at all, because they wanted to be like, hey, we're the real official Dracula, not this German bootleg thing. Whereas Coppola is one of the earliest movie brats. He was actually sort of like half a generation ahead of them, and was kind of the lack of a better word, godfather of Lucas
Yes.
and some of those guys. Um, he had a knowledge of film history in a way that like wasn't really a thing until this, that generation of filmmakers. So he was like, I want to do a movie that I never could have made before. Like I was born after the silent era and stuff. I'm going to make my movie like a silent film. And so his Dracula, although there's sound and color, obviously, his version of Dracula borrows a lot from this bootleg copy, theft of Dracula, and I find that kind of interesting that he was more, even though he titled his movie Bram Stoker's Dracula, he was more interested in the film history than the novel history when he made it in '92.
Okay. No,
But
and
I highly
yeah,
recommend that. And on top of a lot of the movies we've talked about today, I actually like all of them. Like I did like the remake of Nosferatu. I enjoy this film. I like Stoker's Dracula, or I like Coppola's Dracula. There's a lot of good Dracula movies out there, is what I'm saying.
no, and that's part of why it's evolved from a book, to films, to again the video games, tabletop gaming. Like it touches part of the human condition that, and again, it morphs over time from being in this one disease-like thing that spreads. And again, talking about the history, we'll get into this was right after World War One. The Spanish flu had killed millions of people, and in this one, vampirism is associated with plague and rats and things. But again, by the time Francis Ford Coppola made Bram Stoker's Dracula, it was very much sexy, but it carries the rats with it. It's like evolving over time to the point where it became part of the mythos that this film actually tied vampires to plagues and rats. Before it was, bats and counts and castles and things, but this made it a lot dirtier and made it, again, a blade or things that had vampirism as a virus and things like that, evolved because partly this and other things moved the vampire mythos one step further down the line to what we have today.
The recent remake did lean into the plague rat stuff.
Yep.
I don't know. Do you think there's something that happened recently to Robert Eggers that you might have been thinking about
They,
disease for some reason?
again, the Black Death is right there on the screen, but this the Black Death, in Europe would have been hundreds of years before, and this came out right as, again, after World War One.
Right.
Influenza spread, and it was a global pandemic, and
Yeah.
so again, killing 5% of the Earth's population in 1 year, I think. So
Yeah, something like that. It was crazy.
They yes, audiences watching this one and again saying, hey, these vampires spread like a plague, or so would have triggered them at the time. And seeing again rats and things that show up in this movie.
There's some of that great location photography you were talking about too.
Yep.
This is...
And I think there's again a shot maybe of him standing over a mountain like that. That's a reference to a specific painting that again F.W. Murnau, as an art historian, would have definitely studied and was a contemporary of the people making those paintings.
Right.
But at this point, again, Hutter has made his way to Transylvania, but not quite to the castle. And so this is, again, following the book of Bram Stoker's Dracula much more closely than, like you said, the later films.
Yeah, this right
universal...
here, horses running freely through the glen, is not German expressionism. That is romantic in the artistic art movement sense, and I think the movie is stronger for it. I think having that movement in the story it sets the scary gothic stuff apart and makes them that much worse. That much scarier, that much more imposing than if it's like it the whole way through. The new one, I think one of the flaws of it, besides sort of being one tone, is that it's like 2.5 hours or something. Like, I don't know. This movie needed to be that long. A good solid 90 minutes works really well for this.
I will say that I've not seen the new Nosferatu, but that's been my feeling for Robert Eggers films, from Witch to The Northman. It starts off bleak and it goes to bleak and it's bleak, and then the movie stops. The characters are dead, and you're like, okay, this. Whereas, like you said, this starts with romanticism, these pastoral landscapes and things, and then horror creeps into that. So it does feel like there's stakes. There's more of a tone arc. So
it's a tricky movement, and I think that's why I think it's why Murnau is one of the silent directors that still, lasts. And but also he was accessible. Like this was a financial hit. And we talked about you mentioned how he got he got brought to America because of the
upgraded
success
the
of his
big leagues.
movies. I'm sorry?
He made it to the big leagues.
Yeah, but that it was this, and there was a couple others that were like the Golem, or no, not the Golem. But there's a couple others. The Man Who Laughs, the Last Laugh. Jeez, what's wrong with me? And Faust. That's what I'm trying to think of.
Yes.
Last Laugh and Faust. Financial successes. Um, William Fox brought him over across the ocean to America and gave him carte blanche. He said, "Here's your budget. You can do whatever you want." And he gave him Final Cut, which just was not a thing in the 1920s studio system. And they let him do it. And the first movie he makes out of the gate is Sunrise. And it's the first movie that wins Best Picture, or again, one of two. I'll link to the video in the show notes.
Yeah.
You should watch the whole thing. But one of two Best Picture winners. It is the movie when someone would ask Alfred Hitchcock, one of the greatest directors of all time, for advice or like what they should do, he would tell people, watch Sunrise, and that will teach you everything you need to know about how to make a movie. And that doesn't happen, except that Murnau makes some of these horror movies like this and Faust that are successful. He gets to then make Sunrise and do whatever he wants for a large budget at the time. And that happens with a lot of non-American filmmaker. Hell, Hitchcock himself
Right.
was brought over because his British films were successful, and they brought him over to America. And we do these kinds of things all the time. I want to say, sorry, one thing real quick about that horse-drawn carriage that's running through, and it's all
The janky
undercranked and stuff. Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's undercranked to make it go faster. And when you talk to film professors and critics and stuff like that, they'll tell you that, like, oh, it's so creepy and
Makes it eerie.
otherworldly. Yeah. And it's like, no, it's just what they could do at the time. Like,
Yeah.
this movie is a classic. You should watch it. I love it to death. But that doesn't mean every single shot is perfect.
No, and here in a second, they actually will show an inverted, a negative image of it. And
I don't
again,
get that.
It's childlike now, and at the time, I don't think I would have read it as revolutionary. And again, like, oh, they wanted to have eerie alien movement, even from the horses. They're supposed to be ghost horses, and here it is.
Yeah,
a white forest. It's supposed to be a white forest, so they took the black robes off the horses and put white ones on, so that you would look like the horses' character's still the same, but the forest is white. I'm like, I feel like even viewers at the time would have recognized what a negative image looked like in that.
Well,
and just supposed to be
in
eerie.
addition to that, it's one single shot. So you're like, what is that a mistake? Did you guys print the footage wrong? Like, it doesn't look like anything. It's so weird. And I don't it's okay to say this movie is a classic, one of the 100 best films of all time or whatever. That shot's weird.
It is. And
both of those things can be true.
They were trying a lot of things, him rising out of the coffin, a lot of effects, but not all of them land. I agree.
Yeah, and I think, honestly, because it's early cinema and stuff like that, they're trying shit to see what works and what doesn't. That one doesn't work.
Yeah, it's experimentation. Well. Also, again, the idea that
we're freaking works. This is
right.
Cool.
This is creepy because people don't do this, but also are we not supposed to realize it's Orlok, like, as the coachman? And it's just odd. Or is Hutter not supposed to realize that? I'm like, again, it makes him seem like a fool, which I get as part of the character, but very.
Yeah, it is. That's in that what you're talking about, not recognizing. That's in the book. That's in every version of Dracula that I'm aware of. And
I understand, but
some people do it better than others. Like,
yes,
Francis Ford Coppola's version works. Like, you kind of have to think about it to realize that it's Dracula. This version, not as good.
No. But so we're finally getting into the German expressionist horror imagery. A lot of the frame is blackness. Hutter is the only pool of light there. And again, this is also, again, that we talked about color, temperature, and different things. The tinting on this, it's obviously blue means night. They had to shoot day for night because film stocks weren't sensitive enough to pick up anything outside of glaring sunlight. So they would tint it blue to tell
Yeah,
everyone it's night.
if you know what ISO is, the film stock was like 10 or something
Yeah.
crazy like that.
This would have been a spotlight on him to get it to read.
Yeah, yeah. The very earliest, so a little earlier than this, the very earliest films, they were shot in sunlight because there was literally no artificial light that was bright enough to expose film. And the movie Hugo by Martin Scorsese, not a great movie. It's a little bit long and slow, especially for, I think he wanted it to be a kid's movie. It's really doesn't play like a kid's movie. But they show the French filmmaker the Méliès, yeah. They show Méliès making silent films about 10, 15 years before this in what looks like a greenhouse. And it's just all glass, except that they had these sort of long black flags that they could tilt one way or the other to direct the sunlight. And that was literally how they did it because there was no other way to get enough light onto the on the set and then reflected into the camera than by actual sunlight. By this time they did have artificial lights that they could use on sets, but like you said, it's a spotlight, and if you see old-timey behind the scenes, it was like lights that were, you could wrap your arms around is what it took to see in inside a set like this. Part of chiaroscuro lighting and the moody stuff that they did in German Expressionism, and later on film noir, about 20 years later in America, part of why that looks the way that it does, it was actually just a cost thing. Because if you used fewer lights, it used less electricity, you needed less equipment, you just have these dark shadows, and you could be like, it's spooky, right?
Yeah.
And it was they used their limitations effectively, which is, it works really well here. And again, in the noir films, detective films that happened in the 40s and 50s, same deal. Like they were low budget independent films a lot of the time, or B pictures.
That's the thing. They were B pictures, and we think of them now, Humphrey Bogart,
the
Marlowe films. But they were, you have this much money, half of what the rest of our films get. Go make something, and they're like, all right, let's just not light a bunch of stuff and leave it in shadows. And Pulp Fiction's detective things worked for that.
Right.
But I will say, again, we did get into the creepy elements. The cutting the thumb is, again, like I said, from the book and shows up in the Francis Ford Coppola version. And classic Dracula coming on to the young boy into his house. He's now awoken, and again, I think at this point, I think the vampire, mythos. I think Hutter passed out or was vamped. I'm always confused during the scene of he was just like backing up. He's like, "Let's stay up all night," and then we just cut to him in the chair, and I'm like, we didn't like cross dissolve or anything. Say passage of time. They partied all night, so it just seems like he either passed out and now he wakes up and he's like, oh, strange, I have two dots on my neck. So
I think you're supposed to think that he passed out from getting desanguinated.
I meant how many seconds beforehand he cut his thumb and now he was backing up into a chair. He just goes, that was cool. Oh, food. He doesn't connect the dots of, wait, the man was advancing towards me. That's the last thing I remember. So again, his mental state from the beginning, I said, it was rather simple.
It was a different time. He does look like a child as he runs up to the food. It's true. It was a different time. It was more trusting.
People just pass out at random times, and you wake up in a chair and you're like, okay.
Fainting couches were a thing.
Exactly. The fevers. Whereas again, you don't think, wait, did he drug me? Never comes up.
Well, it also, I mean, like the same. I don't know that I've seen a good explanation. That's a similar thing that, like you said, the cut thumb happens in every version. Him waking up in bed happens in every version, and there's not any real good.
I think either I forget Christopher Lee or whoever would have played them in later times, or Gary Oldman does at least a mind powers, like look into my eyes, and I've always just written off in later ones as mind control. He vamps, he's under his sway, and he told him go to sleep. But we do get now some intertitles. I will say, actually, is an interesting thing about the intertitles in this. We have his own handwritten things, communications. There's been title cards just describing, oh, Hutter went here, as he later described to me. And then it has info that Hutter doesn't have But here he says, "Oh, I've gotten 2 mosquito bites on my neck." So the audiences are going to wonder why Hutter's so stupid. We have to tell him why. So he's got to write a note about mosquitoes here. And we'll go, "Oh, that's what a logical person would have assumed." Yes.
Uh, yeah, the intertitle narration always confused me on this. Like, I'm not clear who within the narrative is supposed to have written those. It's a little,
I
I don't know
do
who that's
think
supposed to be.
it could be a lifting. The Dracula book is a series of letters and communication. So they could have been saying, "Hey, we're going to stick to the source material. Let's have intertitles that talk," but without setting up a who's communicating, and then again, they have clearly him sending letters and messages. And then there's later, the ship's log and things are all artifact based. So they do have reasons to pull up paper, and then we get to see them that provide some information. But yes, the whose voice it is when it's not Hutter or the logs is not ever established. It seems like a problem. But I will say, actually, again, talking about, we keep saying F.W. Murnau, but a lot of it, like most films, is a collaboration. And so a lot of the look and things did come from the person that was credited as just a designer on the film, Albin Grau. But again, it seems like he actually produced the film or was an executive producer. He was a member of an occult society in Germany and big into the occult and all things that meant. So when Dracula came out, would have been very up on it, and he had wanted to make a film. So he established a studio and got funding, and he wanted to make his first film to be an occult film. So he adapted and again got the writer on board, connected with Murnau for director. So again, brought together the thing, and I believe even chose the look for Orlok, and again making him more rat-faced and more alien rather than as a count who could pass for human and things like that. So a lot of this look and things I think owes itself to Alvin Grau.
Yeah, the effects are kind of, again, this movie is very influential. Part of it is the makeup effects are so well done that like even today it holds up. Like it looks like a guy who's monstrous looking, to the point where there were people who claimed that there was no such actor as Max Schreck. They said it was some other German guy, Alfred Abel, working under a pseudonym, and he was under layers of makeup and stuff. And it became this like whole mythology around this crazy actor, to the point where later on they made a movie called Shadow of the Vampire, which starred Willem Dafoe, I think, as Max Schreck, that he was actually a vampire.
Right, and that this hit it. So I will say part of the marketing around that, I think Alvin Grau did a lot of the marketing and things. And so we've talked about, again, with blackmail, Alfred Hitchcock having set up a production PR company and told a bunch of the stories how he was a rebel. And here's some of the real quick, just iconic shots. I think Alvin Grau did a similar campaign of using his occult knowledge and things by saying, I could see that being a rumor that started them, but also he had the word Nosferatu was not used before this. So again, vampires and Dracula would have been just using vampire. So I believe he gave press interviews saying that it was a word he had heard. He was in World War I, as was F.W. Murnau. But Alvin Grau, I think, was said to that he had refugees or people fleeing the war, and he was helping care for them in a unit and delousing them and things. And one of them came from Romania or Transylvania and said, "Oh, my father was died, but then came back and drank blood, and we had to put a stake through his heart. I have a letter from the church proving this." And he said this in press interviews, and then after years later, or again, I think David Kellott, the film historian I was listening to previously, said that that's all doesn't stand up. There's no, why would someone be displaced from Romania in modern day, again, wherever, Serbia or wherever it would have been, and be carrying around a letter from the church just in case it comes up when you're fleeing as a refugee. That's what you're going to grab. So it does come across more as a PR marketing story that it sounds nice, But again, as part of this production, I could see the Max Schreck rumor as well, saying, "Oh, no one ever saw him out of his makeup and things like that." He was in other movies. He was in a
Yeah, yeah.
comedy, I think.
In fact, he was in movies with the guy that was supposedly him, the Alfred Abel. They were in movies together later on. It is weird. His name, Shrek, in German means terror. So like, it's an appropriate name and stuff. But it was, yeah, no, it's just coincidence. He just was a creepy dude. I mean, he was able to be creepy in the makeup and stuff.
Yeah. With more of the shadows creeping in.
Oh, it is also worth noting the Shadow of the Vampire. Besides, obviously, the fact that he wasn't a vampire, the sort of set drama in that movie is entirely fictional. That Murnau and Shrek actually were fine. They got along totally well. It's actually more similar to the '70s one, Werner Herzog and starring Klaus Kinski. They had a very sort of heated relationship. They made a lot of movies together and they were friends, but also got into very strong arguments. And so that movie is actually kind of closer to the remake of Nosferatu than the original Nosferatu. But uh, you should, I mean, like any movie about history, like that, you should take it with a grain of salt. But like even more so, like this movie was just it was a B picture. They made it as best they could, and everybody got. There was no real drama on the production of this one. It was just a good movie,
Yeah. No, when the history conflicts with the legend, print the legend. Like it just makes for good marketing. And that said, again, although F.W. Murnau went on to do great things, and the film held up through years, they did not do well commercially, and the Parna Pictures one was in receivership or things even by the time that Bram Stoker's wife was suing them. But
when your bootleg movie is getting bootlegged itself, your company doesn't do very well,
right?
But yeah, they were seen enough that Fox recognized, as long as we control the distribution, which at the time meant physical prints of film, like that's how a movie was distributed. As long as you control the negative and you control the prints, you're able to make money off of it in a way that nowadays, the way bootlegging and piracy works, it's a little more it's a little easier to copy things now, as you might be aware.
Yeah, I don't know what you're talking about. I pay for all my movies.
Actually, speaking of physical prints, I learned something today while we were doing research into this. I've seen a bunch of silent films with what's called tinting. So, anyone who's watching the video version of this podcast, all of the scenes are overlaid with a color that gives a sense of both the sort of physical nature of the scene, but also sort of the emotionality of it. So the day for night is blue, and the sunset is yellow or orange. But like, there's also like creepy green cast over some scenes, and like evil red and that kind of thing. Like, I found out, and this is new to me, and I don't know if everybody else knew this or not, but this wasn't something they could do in what we would call post-production now. The negative was in fact a black and white picture. They had to print the whole film in pieces for each scene, and the prints, not the negative, the prints were colored or run through the dye that tinted it, and then assembled that way one at a time. And so we're talking dozens or maybe even 100 of these different dye jobs for every single copy of the film individually. That's an insane amount of work. Like, we just now, that little wipe, we went from one color to a different color. I'm colorblind, so I don't actually know what those colors are, but I can see
there was magenta on the screen.
There was a difference. And the amount of like manual labor that was involved nowadays, post-production, you're sitting on a computer with a keyboard, top to bottom, like
Control C, Control V is
right.
Your
The color is done digitally, the audio is done digitally, everything is digitally, front to back. Even a movie that doesn't have special. This is another one of those. Like, I feel like Yakety Sax should be playing over this.
Yeah, but again, in between those two, the carriage and this, him walking into the room and then walking out, it was a staccato. I think that might have been more performance than the hand cranking.
Yeah,
but agreed that this just doesn't read.
It's supposed to be him going quickly, and it's not. But anyway, sorry. Back to the coloring. The physical process of film is it like you and I were like the last generation at USC to do. I think there was a couple of classes after us, but we were the last whatever level class it was that we did our group project.
Or
We were the
90 or
last
yeah.
version of that to have actual film, and you edited it. You had
The cut and
actual
tape.
film with
Yeah.
an actual blade. So when you cut
Yep.
the film, that wasn't a metaphor. You were actually cutting film. And it's just the physicality of editing and coloring and all of that stuff has long gone, and anybody who was, born after 1985 has never seen any of that. And it's interesting to me that that part of it is all gone. All of the physical aspects of filmmaking are only on set anymore.
Yep.
It used to be a physical process from shooting all the way to through distribution, but now it's physical on set, and then everything else is digital from there on. It's the actual in-person tangible part of filmmaking is getting smaller and smaller, and I don't know if that's good or bad, but it is the way that it
Right. No, my wife's an editor, and again, from film school, we have several actually splicers for audio and picture. One's angled one with razor blades in them. We have a rewind table and actual film spools. And I explained to my kids, but I'm like, it used to be, look at the pictures; they would move fast. And every time I think, belongs in a museum. But agreed that you were saying, I hadn't realized that about the tenting either, that not just the editing. I thought, oh, once you have a master, you make
right.
prints, you just run them off. And again, when we were in school, or even more than film, you're like, you have a stack of VCRs, hit play on one and hit record on, and you just let it run. But as you're saying, for this, even getting the negative print, you would cut and they would hot glue a negative together once you've got kind of final, and then you would just again roll off print, and you could go end to end. But if for this one or silent films, you had to tint them by hand. Each print you had to make, like you said, if you're doing something successful and there's hundreds to thousands of prints, that's someone stopping you. Now this one's blue. It's going to be 1.5 feet. Just roll this one and make 1,000 of that, and then you have to splice all those together. Sounds very labor intensive.
It sounds very labor intensive and very like you have to be very precise in all of these things. It's what I was looking at because of that. I was looking into the history of it because when you watch old silent films, if you're new to silent films, you may not realize, oh, there's a lot of color in these things, but it's a tint over the whole scene. There were even from the very beginning there was hand coloring that happened occasionally.
I think Great
and some of
Train
those
Robbery, they just colored with oil
right.
pastels onto the film prints.
On the actual film print, yeah, and it was a human being with a pen, so it was the quality consistency varied wildly within a shot and then from print to print because it's a person with a paintbrush. But the tinting was more reliable at least, even though it was still and not as labor intensive. But it went away almost at the same time that sound went away, and nobody ever talks about that. So this was all suddenly new to me that. Hey, so we call these black and white films, but they're not. There's a range of colors. Just every scene is black and one color. They stopped doing it at the same time they started sound, and it occurred to me that and this is just a half-baked theory of mine that I need to do more research into. I think they were using color as not just this is moonlight, this is sunlight, this is indoors. I think they were trying to do mood. And once you were able to have a score that you knew for a fact this is what the score is and it syncs to the picture, it's not the house band, vibing along with the movie. Like I have a very set score that sets my very specific mood playing under the whole thing. I think the coloring was serving the same purpose. And once the filmmakers realized, oh, we can color metaphorically the scene with music, we don't need to actually color the scene because black and white photography continued there. If you look at the number of silent films, the ratio of silent films to sound films in the late 20s it's like a 3-year period where they switch from like 99% to 1% to the other way around. But black and white, it was like a 20-year span before, even though there was very famous color films like Wizard of Oz, it was several decades before there were more color films than black and white. And it's and it was really only in the late 60s where color was expected and
Yeah.
assumed. So there's essentially what that means is that there's like a 40-year period where tinting was technically an option and nobody used it. And or very, very few people used it. I suspect, and I don't even know if this is a conscious decision, but I suspect it's because of music.
Yep. That's
And I
a very
wonder, like you watch modern versions of this, like Schindler's List or The Artist, or most recently Nosferatu. Nobody really tries it. They make a black and white movie that's black and white. The modern Nosferatu, I think, has a little bit of it, but it's not like this. It's not like this color, then that color. I'd be curious if somebody could try tinting again, because now it's all on the computer. It's like you said, it's a couple of clicks, Control C, Control V.
yeah.
I would love to see somebody experiment with that now,
Well,
because nobody
it's,
has in nearly 100 years.
I'd say unless you're Steven Soderbergh, like then yellow is
That's true.
Mexico, or no,
But
I'm
even those,
joking.
even
Color time.
traffic, like it's there's the colors are very drastic, but it's still a color film. It's not
Right.
a black and white film with a tint. So yeah, and that was the early days of digital coloring. So
Yeah.
in our process of going from physical media to all entirely digital, the film was shot on film. There was a weird window of time from the late 90s to the 2010s where a lot of movies were shot on film, but the coloring was done digitally, and a whole new way of changing color opened up to everybody. So not only could they do weird things with colors, but also they could do very specific things like adjust the color in just this corner or
Yeah.
make this person's face light up without lighting up the whole rest of the scene. It used to be that adjusting contrast and stuff would have to be applied to the entire shot and not just to a tiny portion of it. So there shots where the camera's moving and the lighting is very inconsistent. We suddenly had the ability to smooth things out in a way that we didn't before, and that was kind of cool. And I think the first big movie that did it was Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And that's how they got that sort of old-timey look, was because they could do it all. They could do the coloring in post-production, or you always did in post-production. They could do it digitally in the computer rather than in with a chemical bath. Now that's just a standard thing. Like your editing software comes with coloring, and like it's a thing that everybody just sort of does. In fact, a lot of times a low budget movie, they don't even hire a separate colorist. They just tell the editor to smooth it out, even though that's not. Those are two different jobs, and they shouldn't. A lot of stuff unfortunately gets foisted onto the editor, like
Yeah.
for life, when it shouldn't. Like these jobs, the sound mixing and the coloring and the editing are separate jobs with they're different disciplines, and they all require their own skills. And just saying, hey, you're the editor and you can push buttons, you can do all of these, right? That's one of the negative aspects of this digital revolution that
Becoming,
we lived
yeah,
through.
every MacBook you can just adjust color. Why don't you do it?
Yeah,
I will say doing
totally.
it right is still its own, whole job. And we do think, again, all the Marvel and everything films, they're definitely adjusting per
Oh yeah,
pixel
yeah.
down to colors. But
A
agree
high
that,
budget film, it's a separate job, but in a low budget film, it gets
yeah,
foisted onto people,
I
and
will
it's
say, I think this
unfortunate.
shot of her at the beach is one of the ones that was borrowing from German
Oh,
romantic films. But I will also say positive theory of that's interesting observation of, again, color tinting, it being a manual process, and then being the sound coming in. And like we've seen with, Foreign Correspondent and His Girl Friday, they didn't try tinting then. And like you're saying, with speech and sound and music, maybe that's, when you said, it's kind of painting with sound. I'm like Fantasia. But I could also see for the process, maybe they did get to less of a manual process of making prints, and B, saying, oh, we want to tint this, and studios being like, we don't want someone mucking with every print. We're trying to put these in thousands of screens. B, then you with sound have an optical track on the actual embedded in the film itself.
oh, that might be part of it too.
And cutting into it to go, now let's add pink. You're like, now the sound is popping. So again, I'm sure they could have
Oh,
solved
interesting.
for it. But again, the optical track being included in there probably is another wrinkle to
It's interesting. I
adding this.
don't. It's interesting to me that I've never heard any discussion of this, and now I have to do some research. So
We're
thanks for that.
breaking this thing
You've given me
wide open.
homework.
This, yeah, exactly. It's happening now. Again, not 100 years late, but close to it. 95. So again, this part's interesting enough. We get to see the letters again. We get to see what Ellen's been up to, even though she's been under the sway of Orlok. And I did show my kids Star Wars recently, and we watched episode 5. And again, I had seen the later ones, including the terrible, terrible final ones. But areas like the Force talking, speaking using the Force across great distances. When I watch this now, I feel that whenever she's reaching out and Orlok, I'm like, oh, just like when Snoke is making Rey and Kylo Ren have a date night call across the universe, just to open up windows. But she finally just received the letter about the mosquitoes from the beginning of the movie. I thought it was going to be we've had developments since then. The boat is on its way. The rats. Oh, and I meant to discuss. We saw the shots of the rats.
Yeah.
So this was the first one to tie vampirism to plague, rats. Again, after this would have been right after the Spanish flu, when many people probably knew someone that died. So that would have been very visceral and very, common to produce fear in the audience of this day and age.
Yeah, and yeah, it is weird that we lived through a version of that ourselves. But yeah, it is still effective. And also I think, and that's probably why, but like I think a lot of people have a visceral fear and disgust of rats.
Yes.
The boat sequence though, so Murnau and company decided they're going to make this. It's a German movie. It's set in Germany. They are much closer to Transylvania than England is. There's no body of water between them. There's no reason to be sailing other than that's what happens in Dracula.
Right. And it's the same boat name, I think. Well, the Demeter?
Yeah, it's the Demeter in Dracula. I think this is Demeter also. But like that's not.
It might have been Impressa. I just saw it, but
it's Demeter in Dracula.
Okay.
But so like the letter taking a long time to get there makes more sense when they're in England than when they're in Germany. I mean, essentially it's just like, hey, you know what? The book has the boat scene. The boat scene is super cool. We're putting the freaking boat scene.
It's a boat. It's a big lake. Okay. They took a train and they wanted to get off and go through the lake.
And and a lot of it is like, I'm like, okay, that's fine. The boat scene is cool. It's not just a scene. The sequence is cool. So I will forgive the fact that it doesn't make a lick of sense. Because it's scary and it's effective. And like,
and again, it has the crew going missing and these things. There's another, I think, a recent film, The Last Voyage of the Demeter, which again is just about that boat ride. They're like, you know what? People have done Dracula to death. Let's just do the boat part. There's people on a boat. It's a locked room, and they go missing.
Yeah,
they freak out. So it kind of touches on that, and I think it great. And some of the imagery we talked about of him rising out of the coffin, the dirt, and with all the rats and everything, it came about with the ship.
An interesting thing about the influence of this on American cinema, because it was popular in America, even though the production company didn't see any of the money, it sort of started and reinforced, at least in American film, the idea that horror comes from the old world, Europe generally, but also sort of that like Eastern Europe, Uberwald kind of like black.
I will also say the other part about old world plagues coming in on boats. You're talking about immigrants. This is pulling into New York. This ship coming in with a bunch of. I mean,
but I mean more generally, like even if it doesn't actually come to us, like the Frankenstein movie is, it's set in that sort of vaguely Eastern European stuff. The Wolfman is cursed by a gypsy cat people, even, which is a little bit later on. The lady is from Bulgaria or something. I can't remember. But like somewhere closer, to the edges of the frontiers of Europe on the east.
Yeah.
And it's not really until the 70s that the horror is from here.
America. Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
It's all Texas Chainsaw, Halloween. Actually, another one of my favorite videos that I made about Halloween addresses this, how up until from like the very earliest films until almost Halloween, if you talked about what's a horror movie, most people would think of like Dracula in a castle.
The
And it's
universal classic, yeah.
right. And then it's only when Halloween becomes huge that the general perception of a horror movie is a slasher movie, a guy with a knife killing teenagers. And that was a very sudden change in the late 70s. Even The Exorcist, one of the most popular horror movies of all time, I think it's like adjusted for inflation, the ninth most successful movie ever. It actually we don't realize our age, we don't realize how popular The Exorcist
Yep.
was. But even The Exorcist, the demon Pazuzu comes from Iraq, not from America. It's not like she did anything. The girl doesn't do anything in the
Right.
U.S. that causes her to be possessed. The somehow the creature comes from the Middle East and comes to America. So even that movie, which is a very domestic American film about a Hollywood actress in Washington D.C., like it's about as American as apple pie. The demon is still not from America.
So
And it's
I
all,
think
but so it's really only the late 70s with the slasher revolution that we suddenly become interested in American monsters. So this is one of the earliest examples of that, and I think the popularity of it and the way it got cemented into our culture, uh, it lasted for a long time. So even in a indirect way, Nosferatu determined the course of horror for like 50 years.
Well, and I do think that it was popular because it tapped into fears that people had. And I said, oh,
Yeah,
they're immigrants. Xenophobia was amongst them. The Spanish flu, people called Spanish, even though it wasn't from Spain. It was, I think, just it hit each country that was part of World War One because of so many people moving around, troops, and then coming home and bringing a pandemic, a virus that your body's never been a novel, not novel to humans, but new to your area. You have no
yeah,
antibodies to prevent this. And again, the reason it was called Spanish flu was just that every other country, Italy and places, Germany and places that were involved in World War One, didn't spread news about it, didn't report on it. It was censored in a lot of places where Spain was not in the war. And they're like, everyone's getting sick. Is anyone else seeing this? And it was in all their newspapers. And so people saw, oh, Spain is apparently the only one talking about this. It must be coming from the Spanish. And again, so immigrants,
that's what you get for
xenophobia,
having a free press, Spain.
exactly. So, immigrants and xenophobia definitely were underlying fears, and so this tapping into it, and again, with the Spanish flu, but foreigners bringing it in on a ship, and like you were saying, the horrors coming from the old world would persist with every wave of immigrants. You know, the Irish, playing the potato famine, Italians. You know, a lot of things people would underlyingly say, yeah, I could believe that. They'd get up to that. So, A, this film, I think, tapped into that. B, future films copied that. And the Universal monsters saying, let's do folklore from the old world. Let's take the same way Disney took, you know, lore and everything and said, let's make cute animated princesses out of the old Rapunzels and things where people were probably horrifically losing thumbs and
Right.
cutting off their heel to fit in the glass slipper. Like, yeah, whitewash all that. Horror and things went the other way of let's take the folklore of the old world and lean into it.
Oh.
And again, here's some of the classic lashing yourself to the mast
Yeah.
and the creepy.
That classic shot of him walking by. This is very much again. So it is very much an expressionist shot with the angle and stuff, and yet it is also in the daytime, and I think that's unusual. Having the bright sky behind it.
It's tinted blue.
Is it still
So
supposed to? It looks
it's
very much
lighter blue.
it looks.
He's awake,
sky to me.
so I
Anyways.
think it's nighttime. He's a vampire.
Oh, you're right.
So.
It's got to be. Dang it.
No,
Colorblind. But yes, it is. So we're very far into the expressionistic part of it.
yes.
I mean, like this
Again,
shot
I think-
alone, how abstract it is. It takes you a second to even know what you're looking at and stuff.
You could, if you were in film school, write a paper detailing shots, how much percentage of exteriors used, percentage of light on the frame. And there is probably a tipping point at the castle, not with the mosquito bites, because he's outside in the sunlight talking about it. But then once Orlok sees her picture and becomes enamored with her, there's a tipping point of we're into expressionist. I think, percentage-wise, the early start of the movie would be, romantic imagery, And then with the more we get Orlok, the more we get Castle, we did see things like more arched doorways with blackness. And again, Hutter being the only bit standing in the open doorway with a little bit of light. So I agree, the tipping point is past us to where now we're seeing a lot more expressionism. And again, the irises around even the exterior shots we do get. One thing I was going to say for the exploring fairy tales and folklore, you mentioned several films. It wasn't just for things that caught on in America, like I said, or thinking, oh, people coming into New York as immigrants. The films you mentioned included, Murnau did, and German filmmakers did before this, were Faust, Gollum, things that were taking myths, and from religion and things, and exploring them. And those were the most popular films in Germany at the time before this. So it was a modern age, and World War One again was a tipping point. The Industrial Revolution, World War One had mechanized warfare and machine guns and tanks and things. So a lot of the horrors of the modern world might have been people thinking like, I don't want to deal with that. Horrors come from the old world, but also again they had seen a lot of trouble with modern times, and so it could be that folklore myth and stuff was kind of a regression or a rejection of a lot of the modern stuff, was maybe too much. Life was moving too fast. Let's get back to some simpler stories about golems, the devil, Dracula, or things like that. So
yeah, knockoff bootleg Dracula.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that that's definitely part of the appeal, and yeah, we always think of ourselves as being modern, and like we're the ones who are going through the technological change and revolution and stuff, and we have with the computers and things, but they did too, and it was a different kind of so the book was written very early communication revolution. Like you mentioned that it was epistolary, and there were letters, but there was also a lot of stuff that was the doctor, who's not even in this version, Van Helsing. He's recording on a wax cylinder. He's recording his notes, which was like super high tech at the time. And there's also telegrams that go back and forth. And it was like this very like it was essentially like the modern equivalent of showing text messages going back and forth on screen. It was so the the novel Dracula is very much about modern technology in England versus old world Transylvania. And then, like you're saying, a lot of these movies are dealing with it's more modern because it's the early 20th century, and there's a lot of mechanization, and we're looking back at these sort of these things that we can't control, these supernatural or at least animalistic things that we still don't have like a full grasp of. So they were dealing with their modern. This is another one of those shots that's just, if they could have done it better, they would have. Like it's not creepy. It's just it's clearly
the tarp is bad, but I think him poking out.
Oh, him coming up is great.
Yeah, this part, the look is the is indelible. But yes, the stop motion.
That's an actor and makeup like combination like that. Yeah. But the tarp being pulled away magically, like if he could have used modern technology to make it look smoother, he absolutely would have.
Yeah, I don't know if they had monofilament back then, but I feel like that would have just a very thin thread pulling that over would have been better than stop motion.
Almost anything. It was
Again, I have given much thought to the Tale of Nosferatu, and I read that vampire. Who is the I here?
I mean, is it the production designer that you were talking about, like that who's interested in the occult? Like it is very sort of vague. Whereas the novel is, they try very carefully to not ever have a character know something that they don't know. Like that they try to I think there's a couple little plot holes in the book. I can't remember. Nothing that stands out hugely. But the movie is sort of, it's a narrator. Narrators know things. Like, I guess. This is also the coloring is absolutely necessary here. In a black and white movie, it looks like it's just a dude walking through an empty town. But because of the blue, you're like, oh, it's nighttime. And it would be nicer if the shadows were a little bit more nightish. Day for night doesn't always play. This looks more like night than him walking through the street, but you accept it. because of the coloring. There are versions of this that are out there that have no color tinting, and it is just black and white, and it really doesn't work as well.
Yeah.
You really need this coloring to get it.
I will say, as much as we were talking about where did the color tinting go once, golden age of Hollywood, things like His Girl Friday, where black and white, as much as we were talking about the film stocks becoming more advanced for, the 60s or things being like, oh, you can get color cheaper without having to do the 3 layers of film for the red, green, and blue. So it's 1/3, it's no longer 3 times the price of color. So that's what really took off to where every film could be color. I will say, as much as this thing, like you said, stripped away the blue, it's still, like you said, ISO 10. So you're losing got a lot of, it's black and white. There's no shades of gray, whereas, a film like His Girl Friday has tones and, sepias and different things that convey warmth, gray. It's all black and white, but with grays. And you're like, no, that reads as warmer. That, again, having, even choosing lower ISO or stopping it down to show it's cold out in the 50s, we're out in the snow and it's bleak. They could express that by having it be black and white, and versus inside where it's warm, and something like A Wonderful Life, warming up by fire, they could just go, okay, let's have a higher ISO for the interior here. We're going to get a lot more grays and mixes in between the shit. There will be soft shadows, in the corners instead of pools of blackness when they're gathering around the Christmas tree or fireplace, So I do think the film advancement, even though it wasn't as big a tipping point as color or the color becoming cheaper, the film ISO, radiation advancements through the 30s, 40s, and 50s probably helped move away from tinting.
I love him surfing on the canoe with his coffin.
Yeah, and again, him carrying the coffin is supposed to read as a supernatural strength, but every time it just reads as like foam coffin. I don't know if you saw Terminator 3 or whatever, the terrible one, he comes back and he goes and busts out a coffin. He has a minigun in one hand and walking through this Arnold Schwarzenegger, walking through a graveyard, minigunning one. It was the one that opened with him saying, "I need your clothes and your bike" from an exotic dancer at a Men for Men's club. And again, they played it for laughs several times. And I'm looking like, you're sapping the coolness of Terminator here, people. And him carrying a coffin over his shoulder with the minigun it looked as foamy and again
I remember that. Yeah, the third one. There's a lot of bad. This has nothing to do with Nosferatu. There's a lot of not good stuff in Terminator 3, but the ending of Terminator 3, where they actually launched the nukes, nobody expected that to happen. That was pretty cool.
Thank you, Dromos. T3 Rise of the Machines. I agree that it's got a lot of problems, and yet they tried to at least piece the story together, where most of the other ones, even T2, has a lot of bootstrap theory problems of okay, you are John Connor and you're going to send someone back. He ends up being your father. If you prevent the war, you're never born. In my understanding of time travel, you're going to do one loop and then you're going to obliterate out, and then the timeline will keep going without you. So you just unmade yourself by making it so the T3 best explanation of the war has to happen. And I'm like, thank God we finally got there. All right.
Anyway, back to the movie. So yeah, this is actually one of those colors as a colorblind person where I'm like, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to think about what's going on.
It's a sepia. So you got yellow. It's again daytime
outside,
exterior, outside.
Yeah.
And again, maybe by the sea. But again, we're getting a lot of those crew details. I will say they've tried to interject. You talked about, even the Francis Ford Coppola Dracula being like modern London versus old world, and it's more like science and mechanization, industrialization, and the old world horrors could still mess it up, right? Like come in and they have had the intercutting scenes with the professor showing Venus flytrap. They have these officials going through the logs and things like that. It doesn't read as clear cut as, say, the Francis Ford Coppola version of modern versus ancients. Who will win this? These people are like, there are logs. Or there's a professor, and he's like, there's a Venus flytrap. Like vampires, right? And again, it just seems like odd potential people to narrate and could drop information like, here's what might be happening. Look at the camera. Um, and oh, it's, the ship's locked. Let's see. And again, I think we've seen the word plague and rats in the newspaper that Knock finds and a number of things. But here they're just really going through, really hammering the people believe it's a plague, not a vampire, I think is the plot point that feels like it's coming through. It doesn't feel as that, like a dichotomy of men of science and men of, not academia, bureaucracy are trying to understand this horror, and they're no match for it. These guys do not seem efficient as bureaucrats or anything. But again, in 1920s Germany, maybe they didn't have the highest view of bureaucracy or government or organizing together. But
yeah, it's a lot of this stuff. I think it's unfortunate that it is sort of disconnected. It does feel though, like you were saying about the plague and the Venus flytrap matching up with the vampire. That feels less German and more of the Soviet montage stuff, like the Eisenstein kind of things where they would show the czars and the kulaks like killing the proles, and then it cuts to
a cow being slaughtered.
A cow being slaughtered. Yeah, exactly.
Hold on.
And then back to the.
It's a steer being slaughtered. It has been castrated.
Oh, I did not even.
To show how ineffectual, like impotent the people are. They can't even do anything.
But the cutting back and forth, that's in the Soviet movies, it's entirely arbitrary. It is just like, we want you to recognize the connection between these two things. Here, it is at least diegetic. Like these scientists are coincidentally studying something that resembles a vampire at the same time. So like they exist in the same world. The Soviets were just like, we're just going to cut to something else because we want to make sure you understand that this is bad.
No, and again, Francis Ford Coppola had, I think Anthony Hopkins was a professor, and it's like, oh, interesting, blood, and I'm a hematologist or whatever they would have. I study vapors in the blood, would have been time of. They plant him at the beginning of the movie so that by the time the ship lands, he's like, let me take a look.
Yeah, and it works. So here, I think it is a different. I feel like Murnau is combining sort of the influences of a lot of different movements and a lot of different cultures, and I think he's doing a really good job, especially for an early film that is less rigidly following whatever the specific sort of movement in his country at the time is. So something like Caligari, which is around the same time, it is full bore German expressionism. It is the whole, every set is weird and cockeyed but like it's all about the shot, and it doesn't really, the editing isn't really important. It is just sort of going from one shot to another. Murnau is combining influences. He's still very German, but he's combining influences from different things that I think later on will be sort of everything will be sort of suffused into what we call the classical style, which, because everybody melted together into Hollywood.
The melting pot. It's America.
Yeah, and in the most positive sense of that, yes.
Yes.
They sort of, all of these styles melded together in the early 30s to become what we sort of now know as sort of basic film grammar. We took bits and pieces from all over the place, but Murnau is not a Hollywood director at this point, but he's still allowing himself to sort of look out to other places, and not just what the Germans are doing right now.
Right. So he was preceding that he was going to go abroad. He's more international focus.
Yeah. Now he part of why he went to Hollywood is money. Like it's good business and stuff like that. But it was also, like, let's not kid ourselves. He was a gay man dating a Jewish guy. He was
pre-World War II Germany.
Yeah, he was getting away from the Nazis. And some people will look at Max Schreck, Count Orlok, at his features and think, oh, this is 1920s Germany. Like, this is an anti-Semitic sort of portrayal of like their view of Jews being like rats or something, like what's his name in Inglourious Basterds talks about. But I I don't really think that's what Murnau was going for. I think he's going for like these are monstrous features. Like I'm just exaggerating sort of the ugliest features of a person, like pointy ears and rat teeth and stuff. Um, and and it's also worth noting, like if you want to think about like who's agreeing or disagreeing with Murnau in this, the Nazis banned this movie as degenerate art. So it's not like the Nazis were like, "Oh, look at Orlok. That's
Good
exactly what
job.
these Jews."
Let's
Yeah, good job.
let's put this out as propaganda because we all know what it's saying.
Yeah. So like,
No,
I think what it is Murnau is trying to exaggerate horrible features. The Nazi anti-Semitic,
propagandists.
propaganda is accentuating horrible features, and they they're going for the same thing, but it's from different sides. Like
Yeah,
they're trying to make Murnau wants to make this guy horrible. The Nazis wanted to make all Jews horrible, and it sort of adds up to the same thing. But it's not like Murnau was not saying Orlok is a Jew from Transylvania. Even
right.
though I
No,
like the stuff you're saying about immigration and stuff certainly is valid. I don't think Murnau was saying Jew, especially because his lover was a Jew. I don't think Murnau was like, "You're my lover," but also, I think you're a
I'm gonna vilify. No, and agreed. I think the cinematographer may have also been Jewish and again did not actually make it out or fled Germany to Poland, but then did not make it out of World War II. Like this was a work of multicultural work, diverse in Germany between World War One and World War II. And again, Murnau was a veteran of World War One, and I was like, oh, on the German side, but different stakes in that where he was a pilot and I think shot down in Switzerland or something. He had survived 8 crashes, from what I had heard. So agreed that this was from a period in time, and similar we talked about with Night of the Living Dead. Like that casting, an African American as the main character brought certain tones to it.
right.
And on later readings, people could go, "Oh my goodness!" Me saying he shot through the window at the end. This was the same year that MLK was assassinated, and be like, filmmakers in no way knew that was coming and did
Right.
not. So it's a happenstance that on later viewings you can connect. And I think, like you said, it's a fertile area of let's portray negatively these things, but it was not the artist's intent.
Yeah. I don't think. Yeah. Exactly. Here's some of those great expressionistic interiors. Um, it is crazy that like nobody. I guess if you're the characters in that world, of course you think it's a plague, and you don't think maybe this is vampires. So like during the Spanish flu and during the more recent coronavirus stuff, nobody was like, who's like I've heard a lot of conspiracy theories about the coronavirus. I don't think I've heard vampires did it.
Throw it out there. It's as plausible as a lot of the ones that have been bandied about. And at the time, vampires might have seemed feasible. So, and then B, you point out the characters know what vampires are. The professor said, "Look at this Venus flytrap, like a vampire, right?" And like you said, Pete, this guy shows up. He's like, "Oh, hey, you seem to have cut your thumb," and yet Hutter's like, "Weird dude, trying to buy some property. These must be mosquito bites." When he knows what we've proven in this world, they know what vampires are.
I know actually this is I think partially that like cusp of modernism versus old world stuff. The film is 1838. It says at the beginning.
It's set, yeah.
Set in 1838. I'm not sure that because they are post Enlightenment, like so there's some I feel like the scientist who says it's like a vampire, certainly Van Helsing, who's partially inspiring that guy, was meant to be an outlier in the scientific community. Like everybody thought he was crazy for studying vampires. So I'm not entirely sure that just because the scientist guy says this is like a vampire, that means Hutter believes in vampires.
Agreed.
Although, if I saw that guy, if I saw Count Orlok, I would immediately believe in vampires. Like I'd be like, "Oh, now
the vampires." They're now saying that they believe Knock is the vampire. The Renfield character has escaped, and they're like, "Oh, he's done it." Old ladies in the street using the V word.
That's true. So are they saying vampires caused the plague? I'm not like I guess I'm a little confused about like because when we're sort of we've got multiple layers of like we are looking 100 years back on filmmakers who are looking 80 years back,
and again it could be a stratification of the scientists and bureaucrats, and they're being like, clearly this is a plague. Go mark the doors. And then old women in the street are like, it's clearly vampires. This crazy guy strangled his jailer and escaped.
So
That's what vampires do. They're
this is
combining.
this is that bell curve meme where like on the two sides there's the genius and the moron who both agree that it's vampires, and the people in the middle are the ones who think that it's a plague.
Exactly, and they're the so we just proved
That guy has some amazing like gymnastic stuff in there, like which I feel like he must be younger than the makeup implies because he's
yes.
jumping around and stuff.
Fun fact, he was in recently streamed Too Much Film School, Foreign Correspondent. That actor was the valet that comes to the door to tell the foreign correspondent to get out of his room when the whole, I believe, water bathtub gag happens.
Oh, is he really?
So he also moved to Hollywood. Well,
you
England,
say
I guess.
You say recently, but we haven't done the foreign correspondent episode yet.
Oh
So
wow!
preview of things to come.
Coming. No, I mean spoilers.
I'm working on I'm working on that right now. But there's some of that stuff is definitely going to apply to here. Yeah, it is interesting. I do feel like part of why Hitchcock is sort of who he is, he came about at the right time. Like he was one of the last silent filmmakers, but he came of age just as it was changing over, as we talked about during Blackmail. But he was British, and so he's kind of straddling the old European style and the new Hollywood American style. So he's getting the English language stuff right as sound comes in, but he's still absorbing stuff from Germany and Russia. And so he was in a very, very unique position. But he also had to, there's probably a few filmmakers of his generation that were in that like milieu. Hitchcock is the one who actually had the genius to put it all together and become Hitchcock. Yeah. So I don't want to downplay, like, it's not just that he had the opportunity, like he also was the guy who did it.
Was able to seize it.
But part of why he's Hitchcock is because he was in the right place between two sort of different worlds and at the right time as technology was switching over. And then fled Europe before, not because of any sort of persecution, just sort of generally there was a war, comes to America, gets huge budgets, and then becomes the greatest filmmaker of all time. So here we are, we're getting to the climax. First time I saw this, I was a little bit confused where Orlok was, because
they established that they had a line of selling the house right across from yours. So his salt factory looking house windows probably are facing. This is the first time that he's like, I'm reaching out with my vamp powers. I'm like, oh, he's looking into their window. It's not him in Transylvania and her waking up in there in Germany. Why?
And I think part of why I was confused is because he had done that so many times. Right. And in a modern, this is the film stock thing again. In a modern day, even 70 years ago, you'd have enough light. You would see the house across the street from over her shoulder, so he would be sort of in both shots. In the close-up, I guess it's more of a medium shot, but the medium shot, but he would also be in the distant background for her over the shoulder. And so I was always, the first time I saw this, I was thinking, it's weird that it's a straight-on shot. It makes it look like he's across the street. And then later on, the second or third time I saw it, he actually is across the street.
You can see that. I was going to say, expressionists, they should have just painted a flat and had it be the very noticeable triangle. It was there. The light, the film grain was just not enough to
it was just, they just technologically couldn't do it. There is, in a couple of shots, you can see there is a painted backdrop of the building, but it doesn't read as that's the building he's in looking at her at this moment. But that's sort of the limitation of the time. But also, some of it, I think, is, as a modern viewer, I would expect those sort of shot counter shot, and it wouldn't be a straight on shot. It'd be sort of at a slightly different angle. And so that, as a modern viewer, I think I'm carrying some modern tradition into it, or some evolution of the film language that hasn't happened yet into it. And so that's why I think, and I can't imagine I'm the only person, I think that's why I was confused. Even though it was perfectly clear, I was confused because I thought it couldn't be that, when in fact it was. And here's, of course, one of the most famous shots in film history. Apparently was not part of the script. It's not in any production notes or in the screenplay, in the shooting script, whatever they called it at the time, because it wasn't exactly a screenplay yet. apparently they just decided, hey, it'd be really cool. They lit the shadow and have him walking up the stairs. They just did it on the day. That was
Yeah.
not planned in advance
Improv.
at all. Um, yeah, it's interesting because we always think of improv as actors sort of coming up with lines and stuff. Here's some of that sexual spiritual stuff that
Shadow
you're talking
groping.
about. He's just
Um,
it does look like I think there's a certain they could sort of say no, he's grabbing her heart and
he's
like
gonna
yeah, but also
cop and feel. No, again, the sucking the blood and draining the life force, all those things are very. It's understandable. Dracula and the more sexualized, romantic, empowering or overpowering nature of it. I just said this one they went more monstrous, so it is
Yeah.
part of it. But I will also say, as much as I've said, well, they just went and got the Professor Bulwer, who, so again, as much as I was like, he just sticks out so much. He's supposed to be saw as a savior. Same with the bureaucrat. Their Hutter supposed to, we've been following him the whole time. He's not necessarily the hero or protagonist even. He's not moving things forward. He's, like I said, childlike, ineffectual, as are the scientist professor. It's actually her, Ella, right?
Yeah.
Who read the book again and said, oh, a woman of pure heart, whatever, virgin, could, if she invites him and tricks him to stay past the cock crumb. I think we see that passage twice. So they're hammering it in your face. And again, she's the hero of this because she's the one trapped. And she even sent Hutter away to get the professor, being like, hey, I've got a plan here. Get out because you're going to muck it up. Yeah. So these people coming to help and save, ineffectual, and it's all her. So she's the...
Yeah. And that's often regarded as an innovation of the late 70s, that the final girl is the one who kills the villain. But in fact, they did it all the way back then. They didn't do it. A lot of subsequent versions of this that didn't happen, but it did happen here. Also, another thing I learned while we were researching this one for this episode, I did not know that sunlight kills vampires was a new thing. This is the movie that invents that. Like, it always made them weak. Dracula couldn't walk around in the day because he lost his energy or whatever, but it didn't dissolve him.
Make them poof.
I did not know. Like, that is a brand new thing. And apparently part of it is just not quite the staircase thing, but it was, how do we end this?
Yeah. Just have him fade away. Let's just smoke.
There's a little bit of smoke, which... it occurred to me, we were talking about influence of this. I completely forgot the very first season of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, 96, I think it was 97, something like that. The villain that season looks like Max Schreck. And they took the vampires turn to dust thing to, that's how vampires were gotten rid of on that show. Yeah. And frequently it was sunlight on that show. So even a postmodern teen, lighthearted monster show, they were aware of Nosferatu, and they used it as a starting point for their show.
Nice. Yeah. Again, she saved the day. Everything will be good again.
Here's where the remake. I'm going to spoil the ending of the remake because they took this idea, but they took her sacrifice all the way, and she dies as well as killing the Orlok. And this is just my bias, but that's such a downer. Right. Let her let him win. Can we have a happy ending? Why does every ending have to be a bad, sad ending?
Well, I was about to say on screen, she looks the worse for wear. So
oh yeah, no, she had to go through something. It is worthwhile that the heroine in any story, the hero, the heroine, whatever, sacrificing to succeed in the end. Okay, but she has to. I don't understand why she has to die, and the guy's girlfriend is gone, and it's just sad all around. Here, she went through a lot. She went through hell, but she came out the other end, and that's where I'm I like this ending better because of that. The movie is also, I should say, very, very, so it's longer. They stretch a lot, and it's it's in color and it's got dialogue and whatever. But it basically follows the outline of this. So the only major change that I think is even notable is the difference in the ending. They flesh out her friend, they make it much more like the Lucy
Right.
and the relationship in the book. It's Lucy and I forgot what her character's name is in Dracula. Uh, but
I'll get
and
it. No. Harker. So
they make the two girls much more, their friendship matter more, which is I actually think is fine. Like it is an expansion of this, but the only real plot difference is, and it's exactly what you said about like sending Hutter away so that he is distracted when Mina and Lucy.
Mina Harker. Thank you.
Um, they
I will say also, I think I
all of
read
these
that as she is dead in this Murnau version at the end. She collapses. Hutter is sobbing over her and she's not moving.
I don't.
So
She's tired. She fell asleep.
she's
What are you talking about?
the
She's
professor or
dead.
whoever's
I don't
right
think
outside
she's dead.
I think she's dead.
Is she dead? What does
Go-
Wikipedia say? I don't believe
Googling it.
she's dead.
The AI overview said yes, the original Nosferatu 1922, Ellen referred to as Hunter's wife, dies at the end, sacrificing herself.
It says Ellen lives just long enough to be embraced by her grief-stricken husband. I never thought she was dead. I don't care. I'm going to like my version
All
anyway.
right. So you were
Death
like, why
of the
can't we have
author, my
happy...
interpretation.
Exactly. Why can't we have a happy ending? We just talked about the two world wars, that this was in the eye of the storm of, and you want a happy ending from these people.
Yes, I do.
So, modern interpretation.
Okay, so other people apparently comments are saying that they thought she was dead too. I thought he was hugging her, and it's like, oh, good.
All right. She's just really tuckered out. I think being outside the room with the professor in the foreground, he's adjusting his glasses.
He does look sad. I'll grant you, he does look like something sad, but like,
jeez,
I don't know.
A horror movie with an uplifting end.
A different expressionist movie, Metropolis. In the long version of that, the extended version that they've recently recovered in the last few years, it ends with the construction worker guy and the rich like son of the president or whatever getting together, and they shake hands because of the lady, the preacher lady, and then it literally the final like title screen says the mediator between the head and the hand is the heart. And apparently Fritz Lang hates that ending. He was like, "This is the dumbest thing. Why is this the movie that everybody remembers?" And I was like, "I like it. I don't care what you say, Fritz Lang. I like the mediator between the head and the heart is the hand, and I think the girl in Nosferatu lives.
There you go.
Lives.
Reception theory says that you get to have that interpretation. I get to say that.
So this right now. This is the strongest case for the death of the author, is that I get to believe that she's alive.
There you go.
Well,
I not one to tell you you're wrong.
Dang it, that kills me. I guess I just never had this conversation with anybody before. Now I'm gonna have to I'm gonna put a poll on the website and see how many people think that she's dead, and I'm gonna just lose miserably, aren't I?
Again,
I thought that was a change. So I guess I'm wrong. Robert Eggers is even more accurate than I realized. It's also, by the way, if this is a silent movie, there's good effects and stuff. The modern remake is super gory. So if anyone out there who's considering watching it, if you don't like disgusting blood and gut stuff,
biting head off pigeons.
Yeah. It's monstrous level. Like, it's effective and it's what's intended, but also if you don't like that kind of thing, don't watch the movie.
All right.
But yeah.
No, again, the remake, signed. This was an indelible mark made on the history of cinema. It stands up to this day, in spite of, again, the prints were all supposed to be burned. It was banned by the Nazis. It's amazing that it survived to this day. So part of film history.
I do sometimes it makes you wonder what other classics were actually just, lost because of copyright laws and stuff. My thinking is sort of, odds are probably none. It's not a lot of movies were actually blocked for this reason. This is an exceptional circumstances, and I think the reason it survived is because everybody liked it so much. It was worthwhile keeping. Other movies that have been lost, I think a lot of times they were lost because nobody cared and they weren't very good.
My even high school film teacher, kids in the class were like, "Oh my God, Taxi Driver or any of these films from the 70s are amazing. Why are modern films not this good? Everything I watch, from Apocalypse Now or these things were exceptional, and he was a bit older, and he's like, "Oh, time is an excellent filter." He's
Yeah.
like, "There were terrible movies. There were movies with these same actors and directors playing the following weekend in theaters that he went and saw in the 70s." And he's like, and nobody saved them. He's like, they weren't preserved. And again, even from the 20s, silver nitrate would
Oh
deteriorate
yeah.
and catch fire. So if it wasn't good, now even if it wasn't a copyright issue, people wouldn't preserve it. And then again, even into the 50s through 70s, celluloid would break down over time, or nobody transferred it to VHS, Blu-rays, or anything. So when we were watching things in the 90s or whatever, we're like, oh my God, the only things that survived from those generations seems amazing. He's like, he was watching movies every weekend, and there were horrible things, just dreck in between each of those from some of the same people because they had to make money. They were churning out things. So what has survived through time? Yeah, like I said, time's an excellent filter for quality. But again, things like World War probably could have taken out a few of the gems as well.
I mean, that is possible. I remember a similar experience. William Goldman has the famous line, "Nobody knows anything." I remember him complaining that the 90s was like the worst decade ever. And because he was a guy from the 70s and we made the better movies, you guys make crap now. And when I taught my screenwriting class, all of my students were about 20-ish years younger than me. And they regarded the 90s the way that we talked about the 70s because all they know is the very best ones. I saw every movie every weekend. There's a bunch of garbage. Even the year 1999, although I did know someone in film school who somehow called it that 99 was going to be one of those great
Yep.
years that we remember. And I was like, we don't know anything. But no, it was. But there was a lot of terrible movies that came out in 1999.
Oh, yeah.
But it did happen to have a cluster of movies like Magnolia and The
Fight Club,
Matrix and
Matrix, American Beauty.
American Beauty, Sixth Sense. Although I don't think American Beauty holds up.
I
Even though it won Best
agree.
Picture.
Again, at the time, I liked it, and again, being the having the touches of art, cinema, and the color time, color symbolism for the front door being red, and all the things were great in that a mainstream movie was going artistic with these things. But even regardless of the main actor scandals of late, the Wes Bentley character, it's a little over the top for
Yeah.
this is
But
so
like
meaningful.
that same year, Wild Wild West came out.
Nice. See, there you go.
And
Banger
and I'm just looking up like Deep Blue Sea. So like there was garbage that came out in 1999, and these are the ones that Google tells me about. So there's a bunch that are even like below that. But Eyes Wide Shut, for example, I think aged incredibly. Like it was okay then, and I think it's only grown in reputation since then. And I think we didn't appreciate it for what it was at the time. But anyways, this movie 1922. Oh, the reason my friend predicted 99 was that for some reason double digit years are frequently, so like 55 had a lot of really good films and
Yeah.
77 and so they predicted
So not
99 was gonna
because
be
of
one of
the
those years.
films, they were numerologists or they're
Something. Well, it
astrology.
also, I mean, it kind of lines up with generational theory, like because the double digit years are approximately 20 years apart,
Yep.
ish. That there's something to that like the old filmmakers have sort of filtered out and new ones have come in and you've sort of recycled, refreshed the creativity. So I think there's something valid to considering that at least, even if it's not necessarily true 100% of the time. But 1922 Nosferatu, it's definitely like this movie is if you were only listening to this on audio, I apologize.
What?
You should you should go and watch it. It's on Canopy. It's also on YouTube because it's in the public domain. But don't watch a bad copy on
Move away from the
YouTube that's
door on
black and white.
screen.
Watch the tinted version on Canopy. It's very nice. They have a very beautiful print like they always do on Canopy. It's definitely worth your time. And if you've never seen a silent film, this is a other than like the Charlie Chaplin comedies, I feel like this is a good entry point. It it's a little slow and it has intertitles, but it's scary and effective. Watch it in a dark room. You'll be surprised how effective a silent film can be.
Yep. No, and again, holds up to this day, and new stuff to appreciate each time I watch it. And then, like we said, it's invaded the zeitgeist, and there was an episode of SpongeBob SquarePants that cut scenes into it.
Robert
So,
Eggers said that. I saw that in an interview recently. He said he was glad that SpongeBob had reintroduced a generation because the kids who saw SpongeBob, that episode where Nosferatu was in it for whatever reason, they saw it as children, and then Robert Eggers did this remake, and it's his most successful movie because that's
All the
sort of
sponge,
the age that you go out and see a horror movie.
right? They call
The
that the
prime
sponge
audience.
bump.
Yeah, it like worked for him. Somehow SpongeBob promoted his weird remake of a 100-year-old film, and it made. I mean, it's not the biggest movie of the year, but it definitely made its money back, and I think it's his biggest success. So he thanked SpongeBob.
All right, good to know. And
I love that.
inspiration come from anywhere.
Yeah, yeah,
All right, we'll go ahead and sign off there.
yeah.
Thanks
Thank you
everybody
guys for watching and listening. And we will in next month we will. I don't think we actually have a plan for next month, so we'll have to discuss what we'll do next.
Surprise, everyone. It's a grab bag.
Thank you so much.